All right, we'll get started in about 30 seconds. "25 seconds. We're down to 20, 15, 14, 13, 12. I want to welcome everybody today and tell you how grateful I am that you're here. I just got to meet a couple of you for a moment, and I just feel very honored that you would take some time out of your conference to come listen to a presentation on grief. You know, like, who wants to come talk about grief, right? You guys are sick. But no, I'm just kidding. As Roger Lamb told me once, he wrote in the foreword of my book, he said, grief is a club that we join, that we never asked to do so. So thank you again for coming. My name's Tim Sumerlin, and I come from Denver, Colorado. And yay, go Denver. And I want to speak with you today about the grief journey. Unfortunately, this was supposed to be me, Roger, and Marcia Lamb. And the last time we spoke in St. Louis together, Marcia got sick, and it's just Roger and myself. And we got here this time around, Roger got COVID. And his wife texted me yesterday, says she's positive too. So they could not come. So what I want to do is present to you my full grief journey workshop. I do this all over the world. It's really encouraging. We have grief groups in Africa, India, just all over the place. So this is what I'm most passionate about. I do want to start, though, with a little bit from Roger and Marcia, just so you know what they were thinking about as far as they were going to share. They have a book called This Doesn't Feel Like Love Either. Roger and Marcia, they're just great friends of mine, and they've suffered a lot of grief in their life. They've lost their parents, of course, and many friends over the years. Specifically, though, they lost their son several years ago to leukemia, and then recently their daughter passed away. So they've lost two of their kids. So I just want to share with you a quote that they gave me that I wanted to start off with. You know, with Marcia, she was going to do a presentation on Mara and me out of the Old Testament, and what she was going to share was just her personal journey of bitter sorrow. And I'm so sad that I don't get to hear that because I was really looking forward to hearing her. But she just talks about the journey that she took with God and how he healed her bitter sorrow over the years. And Roger, his statement was, grief does not feel like love, but it can lead us to connect with the unconditional love of God and learn how to not waste our suffering. So they had a great story to tell you. They've got a book down at IPI if you want to get it. I've looked through it before. It's called This Doesn't Feel Like Love Either. And it's really interesting. They wrote a book about 30 years ago called This Doesn't Feel Like Love. And it was a little bit more theoretical because they hadn't gone through much yet. And then they went through this book, and that's a picture of their son's, Michael's hand, or not Michael, David, his fingers, and he's got the word home tattooed. And that was a picture of his hand on the cover of their book. So anyway, hopefully we'll get to hear from them again at some other point. But let's go ahead and get started. I always have to do this, guys. I got to show you my family. I don't know why I do this. You're probably not interested that much. But my son-in-law, my daughter, Danielle, they just got back from 9 years in China. They've been on the mission field over there. My son's still in China working on a doctorate right now. That's our little dog that he's got. He's a rescue dog from China that lives in Denver now. And there's my wife, Jackie. And then they brought us little Elsa just a couple years ago. She's my granddaughter. So that's why I really do this, is I just want to see a picture of Elsa. Hi, Elsa. It's your pop-pop. Okay, some people like to come to class and take notes. That's great. Some people want to just come and listen. And maybe the Spirit will speak to you today on a point. I'm going to cover a lot of stuff. If you choose to simply listen, you can go to my website later on this week and just download the notes. I'll have a little button on there, a PDF of my notes. You can pick those up later on. You can buy the book if you want. I'm going to have some books here for sale. But some people just want to listen and kind of soak in. So you do what you want to do. Also, I have mental health blogs that I send out for free. You can sign up for that. And I send them out every couple of weeks. Just my passion is mental health in the church setting. That's kind of what I care most about. How do we use church to help us mentally? So that's what I write about, is how God ministers to us with mental health. So several years ago, my mother died of lung cancer. She had never smoked a day in her life. And when she died, it was just devastating. 2007, it rocked my world. It really challenged me in a lot of ways. I stumbled. I struggled with God. I had questions. And then my father passed away a couple years after that, and it really moved me. I thought, you know what? My tendency is just to go ahead and move on in life. I'm a very positive guy. And one morning I had a dream about my mom, I'll tell you about at some point. And there was a decision point that morning. Am I going to move on and forget about that dream, or am I going to embrace and honor my mom? And so that's where this book came out of, was the decision to honor them. And when I say honor, what I mean is I wanted to make meaning of our relationship. I love honor. My dad was a Marine Corps guy, honor and all that. But honor in my mind means more like illustrate, illuminate who they were in my life. And that's what I want to ask you to do. Is most of you are here, many of you are here, because you've lost somebody very important to you. And the grief journey is an opportunity to honor and illustrate and illuminate that life, and especially that relationship to you and what it means to you. The scriptures are, if nothing, they're all about relationship. They are imbibed with relationship. So that's mom and dad. I miss them dearly. They were actually buried in the National Cemetery up in Quantico, Virginia. So, okay, let's jump into it. Why do we do this stuff, right? Why do we grieve? What's the purpose of grieving? You would think it's kind of like counterintuitive to mental health, right? Why bring in pain in your life and process pain when you could just kind of walk away from it? Well, here's the thing, guys. Grief is a feature and a phenomenon that either we deal with it or it deals with us. There's no choice. Grief is such that you can ignore it, but it will stay in your life. And what it does, when you don't engage grief, it has the ability for over many years to negatively impact you. It can create bitterness and anger and uncertainty and doubt with God if we don't engage it. So either we deal with it, in other words, we make a decision, I'm going to take a hold of this grief and work through it with my God, or it says, okay, you don't want to do that, I'll do it for you. And I know people for 20, 30 years that have been dealing with grief, and there's still this bitter root in their heart. I'll say, tell me about your dad, and they'll just spew out anger. And it's been 20 years. I thought, wow, that's been in his heart for 20 years now. So that's one of the features of why we deal with grief, because we want to get on top of it. We can become numb, bitter, angry. Lamentations has a great question. It says, is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? Look and see. Lamentations is a book of lamentations. It's a book of sorrow. And God calls us to stop and look and see. And this is even beyond relational grief, right? You know, some of us get up in the morning like me. I'm 65 now, and I can barely walk sometimes. I walk down the stairway, it's creaking. I'm like, is that the stairway creaking, or is that me? Like, I don't know, and, I bend over to get something, and I can't get back up. I mean, we're losing our lives, our very health before us. We've lost friends. We lose dreams. Sometimes we lose our children for different reasons. They go off on different pathways. We live a life, somebody once said, all life is loss. And in some ways, it's really true. Even little Elsa, like, Elsa, Pop-Pop has to leave now. I don't want Pop-Pop to leave, She's already experienced what it feels like to lose things that are important to her. So we deal with this, or it deals with us. And the cool thing, too, is a couple other things, we'll move on. When you deal with grief, you learn vulnerability in a way that you've never had before. I love my grief groups more than any other work I do. And the reason is because there's people in there that have decided, you know what? Life's going to give me the hardest thing possible, but I'm staying with it. And I'm going to be as authentic as I can be. I love that. We learn to be vulnerable. Honestly, guys, outside of my time in the scriptures, and I'm truthful about this, nothing has created intimacy with God more than my grief. Nothing. You know, I can memorize all the Psalms I want, but until you experience those Psalms, you don't really know intimacy. You only know it on a cognitive level. So the other thing that grief does for us outside of vulnerability is it creates what I call, we become what we call pioneers of compassion. So we've been doing grief groups in Denver for 10 years now, and the people that leave the grief group, they have a unique ability to connect with others that they never had before. And we call that being a pioneer of compassion. You now know how to service and minister to those who are grieving. So there's a lot of great benefits from that. So I'm going to start off with Jesus. Jesus is always the center of my ministries. He's my guy. If I ever have a question about God, theology, whatever, Old Testament stuff, I just go to Jesus and say, how did Jesus walk this thing? In Colossians, the Bible says, Jesus, it says, all the fullness of God lives in bodily form. Chew on that for about a year, right? The Bible says everything there is to know about God, all the universe, all the creation, lived in this man. So when I have any questions or any whatevers, I just go look at him. And so with grief is the first thing I did. I was like, how did Jesus do grief? We all know the story, right? Jesus has family friends, Lazarus, Martha, Mary. They're family friends. They're not just like followers. These are the friends. These are the guys you have dinner with all the time. He probably played with them when he was a little boy. Lazarus is going to die. Jesus goes, yeah, I got that. I'll be there in a little while. He waits a couple days. He shows up. And Martha comes running up to him, and she says, hey, if you'd been here, he might not have died. Jesus accepted the idea of bargaining. So that's a very important concept. We bargain. We try to figure out with God what's going on, right? With my mom, hey, God, what's the deal? She's got lung cancer. She never smoked. I don't get it. God's good with bargaining. That's a really important process that we go through. Don't feel guilty about that. When you question things in death, be open about it. The Psalms are nothing but questions and complaints and all sorts of approaches to God. It's okay to bargain. Jesus accepted her in that way. But the thing I'm most impressed about Jesus is this. The Bible says Jesus cried. Is that what it says? It doesn't say he cried. See, when I cry, I can control it. I might cry today, by the way, just to let you know. If I do, I can go, okay, Tim, get it going, wrap it up, let's go. Not weeping. Weeping is this uncontrolled, letting loose. He did it in the very presence of the people he's supposed to be helping. You know what I'm saying? Like everybody says, oh, be really strong, Tim. You got to be strong for your family. I remember sitting in a row with my 5 brothers. There are 5 boys in the family. And I'm one of the little boys. And, we're at my mom's funeral, and everybody's got that stiff thing going, like, arr. And I just let it go. I thought, this is my mom. I'm not gonna play around here. My mom deserved authenticity from me, and I just wept. And they're all looking at me like, what's wrong with him, Jesus wept in front of the people that he was supposed to be helping. Never apologize for your tears. I tell people that all the time. When they start crying, they go, oh, I'm sorry. I'm like, please don't apologize for your tears. I'm never going to apologize for mine. They're an amazing phenomenon from God that he built into our bodies to clean us out. You ever feel good after a good cry? I do, right? I feel like, yay, I feel better for some reason. It's God's mechanism to clear our souls out. So never apologize. But Jesus authentically leaned into his grief. There's so much I could share on this, but we're going to move on. We're going to do something right now. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to turn to the person next to you and just, I don't care if they're strangers, it doesn't matter. Share for 30 seconds one grief and how it impacted you. Just for 30 seconds, just share one grief and how it changed your life, and then switch. Okay, go. Okay, let's pull it back together now. Okay, you're like, that's not fair, right? Don't you hate that when you're in fellowship and the guy's like, all right, now we're going to have song service or something? It's totally not fair. What I did to you just now is totally unfair. I accept that. It's always amazing to me, if I were to ask you right now, what just happened in this room? The word that comes out is the word connection. I have people, I do this almost every time in a workshop, and I'll break into pairs, say, do this, and they always say connection. I've had people go, I don't know this guy's name, but he's like my best friend now. I said, after 30 seconds? He's like, yeah. Weakness builds connection. Vulnerability builds connection. You guys in discipling and all those things, when you're weak, Paul used the word, I am weak, 12 times in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Paul was trying to help a church. You know how he did it? He said, I'm really weak. He said, matter of fact, I'm so weak, I'm trembling in front of you right now. That's how Paul ministered to a church. Grief builds weakness, which leads to connection in our life. Never forget that. That's why our groups are so impactful. Brother from South London was just telling me about his groups in South London, and he just said they've been so impactful to people. These are like my best friends. Weakness builds connection. When we're vulnerable with one another, we connect. Okay, I got a couple points I want to make. First of all, in grief, it's really important, I think, to embrace the mystery of loss. I told you a minute ago, there's nothing that's built intimacy with God more than my grief. And one of the reasons is grief has this like stop to it, a brick wallness to it. It's final. It's not going to change. I could be mad at my wife, but I know, we're probably going to make up tomorrow or whatever. You're like, tomorrow? I thought you were supposed to do it today. It's her fault. No, just kidding. You know what I'm saying? Like life can be shifting and changing, and we always have hope. And not in grief, you don't have a hope in that sense. That relationship in many ways is gone. I want to tell a story here that really taught me this lesson. Last Halloween, we had a member of our church, a 15-year-old boy, on Halloween night, his first time being away from his parents with his friends only. And he walked across a busy highway and was struck and killed by a car. And obviously devastating to his mom and dad, and just horrible, horrible thing. The next night we had a vigil, a candlelight vigil at the spot where he was hit and killed. And his mom and dad got up and were very courageous and shared with the group. And at the end of the time, our evangelist, Rob Ferry, got up to pray. And he prayed this prayer of anger toward God, discouragement toward God. And then he stopped and said, we're done. I thought, aren't you going to like wrap it up and kind of move it into something? And that was what he did. And it was out of Psalm 77. So I ran home that night, got out my Bible, I read Psalm 77. And certainly at the beginning of that psalm, it's very much like, God, I don't like you, I don't trust you. What happened? Why are we in this position? This is not good. And then it's interesting because later on in the psalm, he's like, oh, God, but you're great, you're mighty, you're powerful. I see you in the mountains. I was like, yay, God's back. And then I read the last line, verse 19. It says, your path led through the sea, your way through the mighty waters, though your footprints we never saw. And it hit me, you guys, that there's a mystery to our loss. We don't get to always see those footprints. We don't get to always have an answer. I don't have an answer for how my mom contracted lung cancer. In many ways, in a prime of her life. I think it's important that we embrace this mystery that belongs to God and God alone. And we don't get to understand. And that's one of the points of our existence that God wants us to know is that he does, but we don't. It's very interesting. We'll move on in a second. It's very interesting in the book of Job, right? You guys know about Job, great guy, famous, rich, all that stuff. And then everything is taken away, right? And then his friends come in for about 30 chapters and try to like, come on, Job, try to like reason with him. You must have sinned. God did this. God did that. And then near the end of the book, God's like, all right, Job, I've listened to you for quite a while. I got a few questions for you, right? Where were you when I created the heavens and the earth? But then it's very interesting. At the very end of the book, Job's standing there, and he makes a famous statement. He goes, God, I heard about you. I've known about you. But now I see you. And that's that intimacy I've spoken of. God, or Job knew about God. He had learned about God. And remember, this is an ancient poem. Most people think this book predates Genesis as a book. This is ancient history. But somehow Job had learned about God. There was tradition that he had followed in knowing God. But he said, now I see you. And that's one of the benefits of the mystery of grief, is that we go through a process where we come to a point where we begin to see God in a new light. So embrace the mystery of grief. Here's another one. God has a heart of compassion for the griever. You know, in our tradition, there's a little bit of this, be a disciple, come on, get out there and do it. People might say, just pray it away. All right, sister, it's been 3 weeks. Come on, let's go. You know, let's get over that grief. Your mom wouldn't want you to be sorrowful. All those things, right? We're going to cover some of that in a minute. I'm paying her. Would you please keep that going? I'm serious. Thank you very much. I just love that. God has an amazing, compassionate heart. Again, I've learned this through my grief more than any other moment in my life. His great compassion. I've got a little granddaughter, Elsa, and they lived with us for 2 years. It's pretty fun. And, you know, you try to protect your house from the kid and put little bumpers up everywhere. And one day she got up on this big chair we've got, and she just went right over onto a table and bonked her head. And I mean, it was just, blah, just screaming and yelling. And I run over, Elsa. And I picked her up. Do you think I explained to her the physics of falling off a chair? Is that what I did? Like, all right, Elsa, it's time for a physics lesson. I held her in my arm for probably a good 30 minutes. just kind of doing this, and it's okay, sweetie, and a little ouchie on your head. And then she just fell asleep. And that's the way God is with us with grief. It's not judgment. It's not trying to figure it out. There's a sense of just, I want you to understand my compassion for you. When we lost a young man to suicide a couple years ago in Denver, and our evangelist, John Less, did the funeral, and he got up and he challenged the church. There's 400 people in there. And he said, some of you came in here, the young man died of suicide. And he said, you've come in here with judgment on your heart. How could the parents let this happen? All these things. He said, that's the wrong question to ask. And then he just talked about compassion. And it changed my orientation on judgment. Most of us judge way too much. And God's heart is one of simple compassion for those that hurt. Some people ask that question, well, why did God do this or that? That's the wrong question to ask. The question we should ask is, how am I going to respond? Like, what's this going to do to me? Because I'm left here. I've got decisions to make. So I just want to make sure we direct ourselves to the compassion of God. Okay, now we're going to jump in, shift gears for a second. I want to talk a little bit about personal grief. So this is for you personally, and it's for those that you love, so you can understand them better. But we go through several things with grief. We go through mental challenges, right? If you've been through grief, you get confused. Maybe it's like when you go back to work, it's really hard to concentrate. I remember really struggling with things that were pretty normal to me when I went back to work after Mom died. I just couldn't focus. So that's very common that people have mental kind of like challenges in their life. There's physical issues. You know, we might gain weight, lose weight. We might not sleep well. All sorts of physical changes in our body. It can really challenge us in that way. Be aware of that. Obviously, emotional challenges. We know all about that one, right? I remember after Mom died, a couple weeks later, I'm at the rec center. You're like, you go to the rec center? You don't look like you go to the rec center. I do. Actually, I do. I do try to get there. But I was at the rec center. Thank you for laughing. Appreciate that. I paid her too. But I'm sitting on this like bench to tie my shoe up, and I really hadn't thought about my mom much that day, and I just busted out crying. Just busted out. And people are looking at me like, you okay? And what's wrong with you, pal? And all this. Sometimes, you know, grief comes in these waves. And, you know, at the beginning, man, it's like these tsunami waves of just like unpredictability. And then later on, I think, at least in my case, when we process grief properly, they become more like lapping waves of nostalgia. Like I get to think about my mom now in a different way. And, you know, it still hurts. There's still a sting that'll always be there. I actually want there to always be a little sting. I never want to be like perfectly good with it. Because that sting is kind of like the love thing. You know, with great love comes great pain, right? But it's a little bit more like lapping waves of gentle grief that comes in and is filled with nostalgia for me. And that's been 15 years now with Mom, so it's taken a while. But every now and then I look at her picture like, wow, I can't believe you're not here, you know? So there are emotional features to our grief. Spiritually, actually, that's the big one too, right? For us, Christians, guys, don't freak out if people get spiritually wonky in grief. They may not come to church for a while. They may be angry at God. Please don't try to fix them. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Spiritually speaking, they may get isolated. They may get clingy and call you every day or every other day or 3 times a day. Just be aware that spiritually speaking, there definitely might be mistrust, and that's okay. The Psalms are full of mistrust. God, what about this? God, what about this? The psalmist once said, I want to lodge my complaint against God. I'm like, okay. God could have not put that in the Bible. He could have gone, oh, we're not doing that one. But he's like, bring it on. I'm ready for that. I want that because that's what builds connection. So spiritually speaking, social problems, we're going to talk about that in just a moment. There could be all sorts of social issues going on with grief, family issues. Some families get really tight. Some families get distant. It just all sorts of stuff. Be very patient with that. And then finally, I want to remind you that we all grieve. There are unique features like I just shared. They're unique, or I'm sorry, they're common. The things I just shared, you're like, yeah, I got that. We also have to remember that grief is very unique for each individual. We can never say, you should be here by now, you're supposed to be doing this. Here's the stage. By the way, stage theory is not in anymore. The stages of grief were actually created for people with terminal diseases, for them, as they were dying. That's what the stage theory was created for. And then somebody kind of grabbed it and put it into grief. But the stage theory of grief, if you know what I'm saying, like acceptance and all those things, that was for people who were going through terminal illness, for them to frame their lives. Grief comes in waves. It comes in different features. It's unique. Here's why it's unique. There's two reasons I think it's unique. Number one, all of us are unique individuals. And we have just very varied experiences, personalities, so we cannot grieve the same way because of who we are. And secondly, the grief is unique because we have unique relationships with those that we lose. When I was a little boy, my Aunt Rosie died, who I'd never met before. I had no stories about her. And when she died, all I knew was my dad was sad. I went out and played. It impacted me zero because I had no relationship. Versus when mom dies, right? 50 years, she's my mom, tons of interaction. So it's unique based on the relationship that you lose. Okay, so that's really important to understand that. And by the way, we're going to do some Q&A at the end, okay? Just to let you know. So we're doing pretty good here today. Usually I get stuck on the first slide for like 30 minutes or something. This is good. I'm really proud of myself. Okay, can we fix grief? That's my question. Can we fix it? How many would say yes? Let me see some bold people say, yeah, of course we can fix this stuff. Okay, good. Yeah, that's the question I always like to ask. Can we fix this thing? And the answer is a resounding no. But we want to, right? Who wouldn't want to help a griever? We want to, we're disciplers, we give advice, all these different things. We always think we have to have an answer for it. So what do? We try to fix grief. And you can't do it. So how do we try to fix it? Let me go through a couple things real quick, all right? We say nothing. Somebody at your job loses his mom. He comes back to work, and you're like, I don't want to bring it up. I just won't say anything. So we just act like nothing happened. We say nothing. Guys, you can always say something. If you have nothing else to do, say, I'm just so sorry to hear about your loss. And just let it go at that. If that's all you got, give it that. But we'll say nothing. You were lucky to have her all those years, Tim. That guy told me that once. How old was your mom when she died? I said, she's 82. He goes, gosh, you were lucky. That was kind of, I guess, technically true. I felt very fortunate to have my mom for a long time. That did not help me a bit. My mom could have been 182, and losing her would still be painful. So don't rationalize by saying you were lucky. There's one, you got to be over this by now. Hey, it's been 3 weeks. I had a parent tell me that once as a counselor. My daughter lost her best friend, but it's been 3 weeks. Don't you think she should be moving on? I'm like, no. But people, usually they feel uncomfortable being around you, so they're trying to get you to change so they don't feel so uncomfortable. And guys, we say these things usually with like good hearts. By the way, I've said them all. I did one of these just recently with the boy Wyatt's mom on the phone, the boy that was killed on Halloween. I did one of these, and as soon as I did, I'm like, oh my gosh, Tim. This is inherent in us because we do want to help people. And it makes sense to us. Yeah, you got to be over this by now. If people have gone a long time in their grief and you are concerned about them, instead of saying you got to be over it by now, ask them questions like, what's it been like for you? What's been the hardest part of this for you? What do you miss the most about your mom? What do you miss the least about your mom? Generally speaking, people want to talk about the relationship. Please don't feel bad. Your mom wouldn't want you to feel bad, so stop feeling bad. That's a nice little guilt trip to give people. Here's another one. I know what you feel like. I'm like, Actually, you don't. It was my mom. She wasn't your mom. I appreciate it. That kind of like hijacks the conversation to me. If I'm trying to help you, and I say, oh, I know what you feel like. Now all of a sudden we're talking about me. And you're sitting there like, I thought we were talking about you. So don't do that one either. Time heals all wounds. Actually, time by itself doesn't heal wounds. It doesn't. I know people, again, like I said before, lost somebody 20 years ago, and they're still hurting as much as the day they died. Time with a grief process does heal wounds. If you fill time up with a grief process, then yes, you can start healing a wound. God can heal, but there has to be a process in the middle of it. That reminds me about the day my dog died. I did actually have somebody do that with me. I'm like, are you serious? I'm sorry about your dog, but again, we're trying to we over-relate, we over-connect to people at times. We have this real need to connect. And what connection does, when we want to build connection, it's usually by listening. And I'm going to go over a few thoughts in a minute about that. And then finally, we do this thing with being a theologian. Well, the Bible says this about your mom. And I've had people challenge me in my grief group because we don't let people go there. In our grief group, you're never allowed to be a theologian. I said, you've got a ministry you can be a theologian with. Go talk to your elders if you have questions. But in this group, we don't do that theologian piece. We're not going to predict if your parents were saved or lost, or we're not going to judge them. That's not the purpose of the group. And we just will not allow it. You can do a lot of damage when you make those suggestions to people. You know what I'm saying? So we'll let God do what he's going to do. And it's cool, this proverb, it says, like one who takes away a garment on a cold day, or like pouring vinegar on an open wound, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. Right? We're trying to sing a song to a heavy heart. And Proverbs says, like grabbing a guy's coat on a cold day. It just leaves them vulnerable and angry. So what are some things we can do? I'm going to share with you in a minute some of the different ways we can help people in their grief. So one of the things you can do is you can always find a role to play in their life. Now, most of us aren't enough to play all the roles, right? We're just not. As humans. I think we need 4 friends. So I'm going to share with you about 4 friends from the book of Mark. You guys know Mark, the invalid. It's really cool. The Bible says some people brought the invalid to the house. That means a bunch of people. And then it says 4 of them took him up on the roof, right? And then it says they lowered him in. And the Bible says Jesus saw their faith and he healed the man. So I had this thing about 4 friends. And I always ask the question, what was it about that invalid that endeared such loyalty? That's a side note there. I ask people in my recovery groups, what was it about that invalid that so many people just wanted to help him? That's a question we always have to ask ourselves in our pain is, am I such that people want to help me? That's a side question. Obviously, I think about the relator. There's always a need for a person that's walked your path. About 2 weeks after my mom passed away, I was back home in Denver, and it's a Sunday morning about 5 a.m. or something. You ever have one of those dreams like when you're supposed to be awake, but you still have a dream? You're like, uh-oh, I should be awake by now. I had a dream about my mom. We were in her house, and I walked out of the kitchen, and there she was. Now, I didn't get to be with her when she passed away. And they cremated her, so I never got to see her body. So there was a deficit there. And there she was. And in my dream, guys, I could feel it. I could smell it. And I walked up to her and I said, Mom, how are you? She said, I'm good. I'm good. And then I gave her a big hug, and she went like this. She goes, that was her way of saying, no emotion, Tim. Get going. She did that in my dream, and then, boom, the dream was over. I woke up, It was Sunday morning. I sat on the edge of my bed, and my first thought was, got church today, got a busy day, let's get going, Tim. And then the Spirit spoke to me. He said, Tim, that does not honor your mom. I sat there and wept. And it felt like the day she died. It was that raw, vulnerable, open feeling of pain. And I finally got ready. I went to church, and I just couldn't be around people well. I stayed out in the lobby a bunch. And I came home that day, and I called my friend Mark Young. Mark Young is a disciple down at Houston Church. And Mark lost his 4-year-old son to a drowning incident at their home years ago. And that was when I became friends with Mark. And they just are dearest, best friends ever. I called him, and I knew Mark knows grief. I called and said, Mark, here's what happened. I said, am I always going to feel this way now? I was afraid I was always going to feel this rawness. And he kind of chuckled. He goes, Tim, you're good. He goes, the first year is kind of like that, and then things get better. I needed a relator. I needed an authority. This man had lived grief. And I walked away from that conversation on the phone just like, thank you, Mark. All of us need to find somebody in our lives that can kind of, that's been a little bit ahead of us in our grief. You know, we also need a listener. This might be the hardest one to find. Somebody that will just unmitigatedly listen to you without any comments. I normally have to tell people, would you listen to me? And not comment. I literally have to say that. I'm a counselor, and they always think I'm, the listener guy. But I'm a human, so I need listeners too. And so we need somebody that will just kind of let us empty our heart out without any judgment, without any response, without any advice to do. That's a hard, rare person. We pay $90 an hour to do this, right? Counseling. It's really what you do. You pay somebody to listen to you, and then maybe they offer you some direction or whatever. I've got a technique on this one, though. Here's what I do. I've done this a couple times in my life. I'll go up to one of my best friends. I'll say, listen, I need you to listen to me. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy you dinner, but you got to listen to me for 2 hours. And they're like, yeah, sure, sounds great. So I go get them a beer, get them dinner, and then I just start talking. And every now and then they're like, oh, yeah, that reminds me, Tim, of the day this happened. Or I was like, no. I've already bought your dinner. You just have to listen. I do this, honestly, and it's wonderful. I walk away like, for $20 dinner, I walk away like, whoo, I feel really good. It's simple. You got to find a trusted friend that can handle your junk. But it's cheap therapy. Seriously, it really is. So make sure there's somebody in your life that kind of is a listener to you, somebody that can absorb you. When Jesus was 12 years old, remember that? He kind of ran away from home, sort of went back and didn't go with his mom and dad. And the Bible says after 3 days they looked for him. It says this in Luke 2:46. It says when they found Jesus, he was sitting there in the temple courts listening to the elders and asking them questions. And they were astonished at his understanding. I do a whole workshop on that verse alone, on listening and asking questions. Jesus was a master at being a great listener. His brother James wrote a book later, and what did he say about listening in the book of James? Quick to listen, slow to speak. You know where James learned quick to listen, slow to speak? He grew up in a home with Jesus. He did. He watched his older brother Jesus listening to his relatives. Jesus listened to the elders of the city. He listened to the rabbis. And so much so that later on James was like, be quick to listen. Quit speaking so much. God gave us, 2 ears, 1 mouth? He really did. Like, I think God's like, come on, guys. Figure it out, 2 versus 1, right? So be great listeners. Be a truth teller. This is a tough one, too. When we go through grief, we often get off track. We do need somebody in our life that will gently, with compassion, keep us on track at times. Hey, bro, I know you haven't been at church for a month now. I'm so sorry. How can the body wrap its arms around you and help you? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just a truth teller in your life. I've noticed you've gained a lot of weight, or I've noticed your job is not going well. How can I assist you right now? What would help you? That's a truth teller. It's not somebody to pound, hey, bro, let's get the Bible out and let's pound this thing out. It's gently coming in and noticing an area that you need some help in. We need truth tellers. And then finally, we need that friend, right? Got to have a friend. Now, here's who the friend is. I was a school counselor for many years, and we went through some terrible tragedies in our building, and I would always go meet with these kids afterwards that were friends of the boy that died. And one time I met with this kid, and I'd meet with him almost every day for a while. And one day he said, Mr. Sumerlin, would you leave me alone? I felt really hurt, like I'm here to help you. He goes, just leave me alone. I said, teach me, what's going on? He said, when I get home every day, it's all we do is grief. Every day at home, it's just grief all the time. He said, when I come to school, I just want to do homework, have the bell ring, go to the next class. I want to hang out with my friends. But you keep bugging me. So I learned that lesson of people in grief need people that are just do life with them. Because our life is already clouded by this grief. And so we just need a friend. So you might be that role. Hey, can we go get a movie? Can we just go get some dinner? Let's just talk about the Broncos. How are they doing this year? They're going to win the Super Bowl. Yay. A friend loves at all times. A brother is born for times of adversity, right? So that's who we are as Christians. So those are some things you can be doing. And I want to finish up with a couple quick thoughts on how to help a grieving friend. You guys still with me on this? Is this okay? Timing is really important. Here's the thing. After somebody dies, you get about a week or two of like flooding food, freezers full. You're like, don't bring any more food to my house. I got cards in the mail from people I hadn't heard from in years about mom, You get a lot of people fly in from out of town. You got relatives. It can be even fun a lot of times. You start remembering your mom or whoever. It's that third week that you wake up and everybody else has gone back to their normal life. They forgot about you. And you wake up and I remember the morning, I'll never see my mom again. I just felt so empty. But everybody else had gone on in life, which as they should, right? Timing can be really important. If you're not the main person in somebody's life, what I do is I wait for that third week to send a card. I wait till the third week to initiate. Like I'll say something in fellowship, I'm so sorry about your mom, But I'll wait for like 3 weeks before I sit down and say, hey, how you doing? Can I take you out for a coffee? I want to listen to you. Timing can be really important. Try not, if you're the main person, obviously you don't want to wait for 3 weeks. But if you're not the main person, wait for a couple weeks and then come into their life. That's when they need it the most, oftentimes. Make sure you always keep a safe and confidential environment. So we're in fellowship. Hey, tell me how you're doing with your mom. That's not safe and confidential. People are walking by. Hey, want to get some lunch later on? Hey, good to see you, bro. If you're going to do it in fellowship, take them to the back of the auditorium and sit down, just the two of you. And anybody that comes by, just glare at them like, leave me alone, talking to my friend. Safe and confidential. When I take my friend out for dinner, we get a booth in the back. And I'll buy him dinner. I'll be like, I want to hear about your dad. Tell me all about your dad. What do you miss the most about your dad? What do you miss the least about your dad? What was the favorite thing you ever did with your dad? If your dad was here today, what would you ask him or tell him? Safe and confidential. I've realized, guys, I do a lot of recovery work. Almost the biggest comment outside of Jesus is in the middle of your recovery. That's the biggest one. But the second biggest one is, Tim, you gave me a safe place to do my life. Because we give people these spots to do their recovery. People yearn for safety, and they yearn for a confidential ear to listen to them. Listen and learn with faithful questions. Ask questions that get you to understand their loved one better. I want to know about your mom. Would you help me understand what she was like? What was your relationship with her like? Ask questions that are faithful, but they move the conversation forward. Don't be afraid to go there. Most people, they'll tell you if they're like, this isn't a good time. Okay, maybe next week or something. I don't know. But most people want to talk about their loved one. They do. So ask questions that lead to a good conversation. Here's the one in red. Hold the moment. Learn how to hold on to the moment. This might be one of the most important things I teach today. We get uncomfortable, as we should, when people are grieving. It does make us feel uncomfortable. So our tendency is to interrupt and kind of stop it somehow. The boy I told you that committed suicide, his mom and dad are just great members of the church. They've given me permission to share this. It's in the book. About 2 weeks after the funeral, or 3 weeks after the funeral, their Bible talk leader calls me and goes, Tim, I don't know what to do with my Bible talk. Because Rachel and Walter are coming. We don't know what to do. Would you come do a Bible talk for us? So I came in, I did a social grief Bible talk. Just taught them some of this stuff. And Rachel was there, his mom. And afterwards, she came up to me and she just was weeping. And she said, Tim, I need Nick to come home. Nick needs to come back. And I'm standing there absorbing this grief. And what was my tendency to think to do? What was my temptation? I was tempted to correct her and say, Rachel, I'm sorry, but Nick's not coming home. That was my temptation. Thank goodness I didn't do that. I held on to her moment for about 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, and just let her pour it out on me. And it's very interesting, as I held that moment with her, and I cried with her, she started morphing into more rational thought, I think. I just miss Nick, Tim. I just miss him so much. I don't know how I'm going to live my life without him. I learned a valuable lesson, is learning to hold the moment with people. That is a valuable treasure that you offer people, is to just sit there and absorb their grief and cry with them, maybe hold their arm for a second, but don't try to interrupt it. We want to interrupt those tears because they're painful. But to hold on to a moment with somebody is, she's done it one or two other times with me. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to hold this thing for as long as it takes. And Rachel and I have a very special bond now, simply because of holding the moment. Love and act, that's another one. You know, here's what we do typically at funerals, and we do it with a good heart. We walk up to the person grieving, and we say, I'm really sorry about your loss. If I can do anything, let me know. Right? Done with a good heart, probably meaningful to us, like we would do something, but we've now put a burden on them. And most people just never come back and say, yeah, I need this or this. So what I've done now, I try to do this, is I will think about what do they need, and then at the appropriate time, I will say, hey, I'm really sorry about your husband. On Wednesday night, I'd like to come over and take your kids to McDonald's for a couple hours, just to give you some free time. Will that work for you? And they're like, yeah, sure. Or I drove by your house and the lawn's a mess. You know, can I come by on Saturday and just mow your grass? Love by acting, like give them something. And you might need to negotiate a little bit, like she's like, no, Wednesday night doesn't work well, whatever. But give them what you want to do and then just go ahead and do it. It's amazing. It really can help. And then finally, guys, and then I'm going to conclude with a couple quick thoughts. This is not easy work. It takes a hopeful heart. You, as the helper, have got to be hopeful that God is working in this person's life and you're simply an instrument for that. So keep a hopeful heart. Our final group that we have is called enduring relationships. It's a biblical concept that we all have an enduring relationship with those that we lose. Matter of fact, it's impossible not to. We all have an ongoing relationship with those that we lose. It's biblical. In the final chapter of my book, I explain where I got it from in the Bible. It's the idea of living in memorial stones that God talks about. God used to say things like this: pile a bunch of rocks up by the river, and every time you walk past them, I want you to remember the 12 tribes of Israel, those fathers. Just every time you walk past it. There's this one time he told Aaron, he goes, when you go to the inner room to intercede for the people, he said, I want you to build this like coat, jacket. And on it, he goes, put these stones on it. And then he said, put stones across the heart of this jacket. He said, whenever you make decisions for the people, wear this thing. And the stones were the 12 tribes of Israel. So he's basically saying, when you make current decisions, I want you to go back in your heart and mind to those previous ancestors and who they were and what they meant to you as you make current decisions. It hit me. We have this connection to the past. I was working on my dissertation. I was like typing away, and I had no business writing. It's a book you have to write, like a research book. And I had no business doing it. And I'm typing away, and I'm super frustrated. And I finally stood up. I said, I'm done with my dissertation stuff. I'm done. I'm quitting. Right? Which is pretty stupid to say it. I was already 4 years into it. I walked into the front room of our house. We have a piano with Mom and Dad's picture and their ashes. And I went in there, and I started talking to my mom. Okay? I'm not usually one to talk to the dead, but I did. And I just poured my heart out. Mom, I'm just so frustrated. See, my mom was a big educator. She used to drag me to the library and make me get books. And I just started like pouring my heart, like I'm finished, I'm frustrated, I'm not going to do any more of this. And her voice came back to me, right? You know the voice. Tim, stop complaining. Tim, get back to work. I'm not going to listen to you do this. The voice of 50 years of being with this woman. And I stood there like, Mom, you're right. Yeah, you're right. I went back and I made a different decision. I finished the thing. My life was getting ready to go in this direction or in this direction. And I was ready to go this way. And my mom changed my mind. I went this way. So I realized we have this ongoing relationship with those that we lose, if we choose to honor it. And so what we teach at the very end, we teach people to have memorials and rituals, which is what we do every Sunday. What's it called, by the way? It's communion. It's a memorial. We remember Jesus, and it's a ritual. We do it every Sunday. It's a memorial and a ritual. So I teach people, have a memorial in your home like I do. I found my own, made something. Whatever works for you, put a book on a bookshelf with a picture on top. I don't know. But what's meaningful for you. And then do rituals that are meaningful for you specifically. And I'll close out with a story on this, and then we'll be done. The morning my dad died, January 1st, 2011, he was in his home, and he died at 7 a.m., and all the brothers are standing around his body. And my little brother, my dad used to say, hey, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Let's get a rum and Coke. That was his thing, right? Rum and Cokes. So my little brother standing next to me, he goes, hey, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. This is 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning. He goes, hey, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Let's get a rum and Coke. So we all go back in the kitchen, we pour rum and Cokes. We come back out and we stand around his body, and each one of us told a story about Dad. We each got to tell our favorite story about my dad. It was very meaningful. So now every January 1st, in our separate homes around the country, we sit down with our kids, and we talk about Grandpa. We pour rum and Cokes, and we talk about Grandpa. We tell stories about Grandpa. And then we post it on Facebook. Every year we do this. So we all have these like pictures of rum and Cokes. And it's a ritual we do that's very meaningful for my family. It might not mean anything to your family. I had a brother once like, yeah, we're starting to do rum and Cokes too. I'm like, don't do it unless it's meaningful. And don't start drinking rum and Coke just because I do it. But find something that brings back meaning. I have a brother in L.A. Every year his mom used to make German soup to feed the poor. She'd make this big vat of German soup. So he does it now. On the anniversary of her death, he takes this big vat of German soup to the homeless, and he feeds poor people with it. That's his ritual. Find something that's got meaning for you in that. So that's my presentation for today. I'm so grateful you're here. I'd like to thank you very much. Thank you. Very encouraging. Thank you. That's kind. I'd like to just spend a couple minutes. If you have, and I'm going to be selling books afterwards if you want to come and get one. Or I've got a booth downstairs in the exhibit hall. Or you can get up and leave if you want. But we do have a few minutes. I'd like to see if anybody's got questions that are either a clarification of what I just did. Like maybe I said something, you're like, I don't quite understand what that means. Or can you repeat it? Or a general question that might help the whole group. So, try to stay away from like real specific things about your family. I'd definitely talk to you later about that. But any questions that you have that might be either clarifications or like a general question. Yeah, Laura? Yeah. Yeah, so those are just questions that get the conversation going. So they're focused on the person, and their relationship. And they're curious questions. A good friend of mine, his mom just died, my mentor, Greg Jackson. And so I'll ask him questions like, tell me about your mom. Like, what kind of woman was she? What was her strength? What did you like about her? What did you not like about your mom? What was the hardest part of her losing her? Those are questions that open him up to just like, well, let me share. They're open-ended questions. So those are good ones. Tell me about your mom. What you like? What you dislike? What do you miss the most about her? If she was here today, what would you say to her? That's a good one. Yes?
How do you help kids process the grief? I think as we are as adults, but how to help the kids.
Yeah, that's a great question. The question is, how do we help children? All the way from little guys up to into adolescence. So that's almost a whole industry in itself. So the couple things I'd say is, number one is always be honest, but at their level of what they can take. Try not to use euphemisms when you don't have to. Like, oh, they're floating in heaven now or something like that. Try to be as honest and use their language, the vocabulary they understand, but it's what they can developmentally take in. So a little child may not understand the concept of murder or suicide because they're developmentally not there yet. So you may not be able to share that part with them yet, but they can definitely understand that Daddy will never be here again. Yeah.
And so the children say that even dumber.
Yeah. Well, for sure, it's a great time to teach compassion. That's the most important thing we do, is not understanding grief, but having compassion. And I think also remember that children will act out more than adults will. Children will act out and do things behaviorally to kind of express themselves. And so be very cautious of that, to not correct the behavior, but to understand this is a window of opportunity to sit down and have a conversation about what's going on. And kids can typically also, I know teenagers do this, they tend to compartmentalize and lock away for another day. They pack a suitcase and put it away. That's really normal. We can't force them to process. We have to just keep a good eye on when they're ready to do so. But we can't make them do it. And the last thing I'll say with grief overall, but with kids too, is they tend to relitigate grief every transition in life they go through. So when they get their first girlfriend, it sometimes will bring up oh, Mom's not here to see this. When my daughter got married over in China, I had to sit outside for a few minutes and relitigate that Mom and Dad won't get to watch their granddaughter get married. So every time we go through a kind of a new phase, we reassess our grief. Thank you for asking that. Yes, sir.
You were sharing about holding the moment, and your friend Rachel was one thing back.
Yeah.
Said, I held that moment for 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
How did you do that? What did you do?
Yeah. Well, one thing I always realize is it's not a cognitive problem. Grief is a broken heart. It's not a broken mind. That's why we typically don't need professional counseling for grief. And I'll get to your question in a second. With grief counseling, what we need counseling for is if grief gets tangled up with mental health problems we have. Like if we already have depression or anxiety, then grief can tangle itself up with those two, and then we need professional help to get them untangled. But grief by itself is a human condition, okay? So I just want to make sure I clarify that. As far as holding the moment, there's a lot of internal praying going on. There's a lot of reminding myself, Tim, shut up. Like when you're thinking something like, oh, if I could just tell Rachel this, then she'd be okay. That's that cognitive thing. I think it's a broken brain with Rachel, but it's not a broken brain. She had a broken heart. And how do you heal a broken heart? You hold on to it. I mean, so it was a learning time for me to just simply stand there and I allowed myself to feel. Like, if my son had done that. And so I cried with her. And then I just kind of waited. And, you know, sometimes she morphed and said, I just miss him. She morphed and got into a more rational space. But maybe that wouldn't happen. And then it's just, I'm with you, Rachel. I'm here. I'm just so sorry. And so there's no fixing it. There's just a connection is all there is. Yes?
We have a friend that does like kind of like a grief thing in their church.
Mhm.
It's a different church, but we had lost our son. We talked a lot with them, and we were sharing with them about just having those moments to talk with them, write them a letter, write our son a letter, things like that. And he came back with something like, well, we don't believe that like for him it was like you're conjuring up the dead, like you're talking to someone and it's like biblically not correct. And I don't see it that way, but now I'm like, oh shoot, I don't want to do anything that's not
Yeah.
biblical, godly, or
Yeah. Yeah.
spiritual. And it just really like
Sure.
kind of made me think, really put me in the thought process of like, oh no.
Sure. Well, I'll just say two things. Number one, it's very biblical. I mean, God honors relationships present and past, for sure. And number two, I try to let people lead me, the griever lead me. So I let them lead me on how I help them. So if they're at a place where, like, not going to entertain that thought, that's where they are, and I'm not going to try to change them. You know, chances are God's Holy Spirit is working in their lives, and I want to be available. It might be a year from now I'm available. You know what I'm saying? I might get a call like, hey, I really want to talk to you about some things. But again, my job is compassion. So it's not to convince them or anything like that. It's just, I really let them lead me in this area for sure. Yes, right here.
Is there a role as a parent when, say, your spouse passes and your adult children just stuff their grief and go on with life? Is there a role?
Yeah.
Or can we just let that happen?
With your own, like their adult children?
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear that all the time. You know, I hear that all the time in a lot of contexts. It's like, I'm in this place and they're in this place. Or, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're all in these different places. And sometimes we have families come to the grief journey groups. And that's always really tricky because they're just in these different spots. The family dysfunction comes in and plays a role. What I think about in things like that is I think about other resources. Like, the family can be a resource for the different kids, but I think, are they accessing other people, other resources for their lives? So, you know, oftentimes I don't want my mom to help me with something. She's my mom. I'm not going to confess certain sins of her, but I do have other resources to go to. So I think in terms of maybe pointing them to other things that might support and help them at whatever time in their lives. The other thing I'd say is with our adult children, somebody told me this a while back, my biggest role to help my adult children is that they see joy in my life. You know, like, when they're adults, I don't get to have much of a voice sometimes. I just don't. I'm their dad. So this guy told me, he goes, Tim, the biggest thing you can do is get them to see the joy in your life. That will help them more than anything else, is that you're a joyful man, you're confident, you're joyful. They already know what you think and believe. You know what I'm saying? Like, they already know who I am and all that. But for them to see you joyfully living your life is probably the best help we can give them. So I hope that helps. Yes, right over there.
I've been away for over 7 years. Then we have my husband passed away when he was 3 years old. So when the grieving, I know I can process my pain when it's grown up. But in his case, I I explained to him according, in his level, when he was little. Now that he's already 11, my question is, how can I draw, I mean, draw him out?
Sure.
I know he's a happy kid, but when I got sick 2 years ago, he has the feeling of, he was sad because he told me, I don't want you to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how can I help him out?
So I think you use that word, draw him out, is the biggest thing, is we give people an arena or an atmosphere of safety. And then we let them use that to talk. So just keep creating that it's a safe place to talk to me about whatever's on your heart. And I'm not going to judge you. We're just going to talk. The other thing is use your school counselor. They're professionals. They can be a really good resource as well. Usually schools have like groups for kids, grief groups, that are specialized for kids. And they can be really good resources as well. Thank you for sharing that. In the very back there. Yes, you. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for asking that. That's like a softball question, right? So there's a couple things. One is make sure you've done your own grief appropriately, that you're good at in your own skin with your losses. We always have people in grief groups do the hardest loss they've got because we walk them through one relationship that's been really difficult. So make sure you are for sure in that way. Guys, the other thing is, I'm just going to promote here for a second, is have a grief group in your church. I don't know why our churches don't do grief groups. There's just, to me, it's like, it's ministering to the most hurting of the day. So my whole program is designed to help people have small groups. We do them all over the world now. And just start doing a group in your church. You know, get a hold of me. There's a little bookmark there. Email me and say, hey, Tim, I'm in the South Connecticut church or whatever. We want to get this thing going. We'll work out a way to do some Zoom training. Not a lot of training. I've had so many people, guys, talk to me. They're like, hey, Tim, I do your group, just let you know. I'm like, I've never met you before. I was like, I know. I never trained you. Yeah, I know, but we're doing a great job. I built this thing. I built it very simply. It's human connection is mostly. And so anybody can take this book, go through it on their own, and say, let's get some friends, gather around. It's a week to week, 6 weeks. People do a chapter a week. They journal in the book. They come back to a group and go, I say, what'd you learn this week? And I've got 2 little questions in each group that we get to share. And then we go on to the next one. And it takes 6 weeks to do it. Now, there's some things to learn as far as like how to hold moments and things like that with people that are, for the training is really good. But if you want to get really going on this, start doing groups. And so, yeah, please email me and say, hey, I'm that guy in the back there. Yes, ma'am. No, go ahead. I'm walking over there. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So my question then is how well this translates for grief in other areas.
Yeah.
Health.
Sure, yeah. And that's the problem. I retitled the book, Finding Peace in All of Life's Losses. And I'm rewriting this book to include more of that. But basically what I tell people, so people come to group mostly for relational loss. I had a guy come a couple of years ago for his son was becoming a woman, those kind of losses. I just tell them you got to tweak some of the pieces here. Even divorced people come, and that last chapter doesn't do well for them because it's the idea of an ongoing relationship, which is not what they want. So we have to tweak it, but it's still useful. I do tell people in group, I say, you know, it's a little bit hard if you lost your job and the guy next to you in group just lost his mom. That's feels kind of wonky. It doesn't mean your loss is not significant of losing a job, but a group may not be a good atmosphere for that. But we do have people come for other losses. Over here, yes.
My question has to do with more like complicated grief
Okay.
that
Is it a complicated question? Okay.
in the situation where there's a complex grief where there's not a closure and it's something that keeps resurfacing and you can't like completely
Sure.
move forward with
Uh-huh.
some of this stuff.
Sure.
So what are some strategies?
Well, definitely professional counseling can be really good, especially a person that specializes in grief. They can, because they've done it over and over and over and over, and they can see you and read you pretty quickly. Like when I go get professional help, I want somebody that's like done it a lot, because I want them to look at me and pretty quickly assess where I'm at. So, that sounds like if you've done everything you can do, right? I've read books, I've prayed, I'm in the scriptures, I've been with my friends, I've done, it's been 5 years now, and I still seem to hit this wall, but I've done all that I can do, then I think professional counseling can be really, really helpful. And if you haven't done all those things, keep doing all that you can, and then God will make it clear, you need a little more help here. Somebody in the back, I think. Okay, right back here. Yep. Right. Yeah. So depending on the age, depending on your specific relationship with each kid, it could be. And I would encourage you, if you're a talker and you process that, make sure you've got peers that you're doing that with, because you're still a mom. And I don't know if kids want to frame their mom around grief. So make sure you have some other people that can bear your burden in that way. Okay? And I think right here, yes. Yeah, good question. I mean, one thing I tell people that come to grief group is I say, guys, this is going to zap your energy for 6 weeks. Tell your husband to leave you alone. Have him fix dinners for you. Carve out time for yourself. So that's really important. So one of the things, if you've got to go back to work, then all the other things in your life that you can deal with and change, make sure you do that. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe work is an unmitigated, there's no, either that or I don't get a paycheck kind of thing. Then I can't change that, but there's all these other things I can change. I can quit watching Netflix. I can get to bed earlier at night. I can eat more salad. Whatever the thing is that you need to keep yourself up and running. And then I think an honest conversation with the boss would be appropriate. Are there ways that maybe I could lighten my load for the next 30 days? Can I get off this one project, or whatever? I think those conversations can be appropriate. But make sure you take good care of yourself, okay? Yes? Yeah. So dreams are amazing. They're called grief dreams. Every time I have one, I've had a couple about both my parents. I get up in the morning and I write them into my Google Calendar and I hit an annual reminder on it. And every year it pops up and I relitigate that dream. I try to rethink through it. What did it mean? What did it mean to me? So grief dreams are pretty fascinating. There's not a lot written on them, actually. But they're pretty fascinating. People say this. They go from two ends. They'll say a grief dream is an actual encounter in the third world kind of thing. That's kind of where I was with my mom, somewhere on that spectrum. And then they'll go all the way down to here to say, oh, it's just kind of like your brain refragmenting memories and stuff. Don't worry about it. So that's kind of the spectrum on how to, what are these things? I tend to be a little bit more here. I'm more spiritual in that way. I don't make people do that. So that's one thing is I happen to delight in grief dreams, and they're not always pleasant. Some of them have been a little disturbing, but I write them down and I think through them, pray through them. God, is there a message for me in this? How do you know you're done with grief? I have no idea. That's a horrible question. That's I don't know. I don't think I'm ever done with my grief for my mom and dad. Like I said, there's still a little sting that I hope is always there. Because it reminds me that there's great love between us. And I want there to be a little, I hope my kids have that little push when I go for a long time. They better. But yeah, and just, there's times, it's been 15 years with my mom. I still go in, I'll do a grief workshop and I'll start crying. I go and see my wife. Hey, I just want to talk to you about this a little bit. And I'm, kind of reliving some of it. So I don't think it ever really ends. But again, guys, it's my greatest intimate connection with God. For that, I'm thankful. Yes?
What if you're counseling somebody, combined with the grief, they also have some kind of guilt? Like maybe their last conversation with that
Yep.
person was a bad conversation. They weren't there with
Yeah.
that person.
Yep.
They just can't get past the guilt, so they never get to grieve.
Yeah, so that's the very essence and the premise of my book. The premise is that we don't grieve well because we have unresolved issues. So what we do, we teach a lot in the book. People write a lot about stuff. But at the end, we have them examine a relationship, the hardest one, which is the most difficult relationship you got. And then we have them write down how I wronged that person, never resolved it. So with my mom, I gave her the finger behind her back. I cussed at her. I didn't feel like I was very grateful for her the way I wanted to be. I resolved that by apologizing to my mom in a letter. And then I do the same for her sins against me. My mom was controlling. She didn't like the church I joined. We never resolved those things. I'm like, Mom, we're good. I forgive you. And what we believe is that when you wipe that stuff off the table, the Apostle Paul said, as far as it is possible, be at peace with one another. When we wipe those things off the table, then we can see clearly. And then I was able to think about Mom and Dad kind of in that rich relational way. And those things don't pop up in my mind anymore. But we have to do that work of resolving. So that's what the book's all about, and the group's all about, is we help them resolve those things. And then we get to the end, which I just shared, right? The ongoing relationship. And people are like, yes. It's kind of like when you get in a fight with your spouse, right? You don't like her for a while, then you resolve it. You're like, yes, we're back. I like you now, It's kind of the same idea. God wants us to resolve, and we can still do it even when they're not here anymore. God would never want us to walk around with burdens like that on our hearts. He would never want that. So we get to resolve those to the best of our ability. Great question. You guys, I'll be up here for a little bit more if you want to get a book. I've also got a table. I'll be down there all day today and tomorrow and Sunday. Please come by and just share with me what you're thinking. Thank you so much.